Right, I think I'm here. Apologies, I am a little late and I haven't even got my computer started, although that seems to have gone well. He's gone silent. I am here. Right, I don't know what the date is. It's the 17th of July. It's the 17th of July 2024. Hello, welcome. This is Chat with Matt. I'm Matt. Half an hour or so to talk about whatever's going on in your part of the world. I popped a little post on of me sitting at, that's actually at Permakali, ancient city, at a rather large theatre that has been extensively restored, and it is quite a magnificent place to be. So I'm in Turkey. I'm in Istanbul right now. We've been travelling for the last week pretty much, after having a week or 5 days in Kaş, which is spelled K-A-S, on the coast, which was very, very nice. We have then I have driven our little rent-a-car up here to Istanbul, and we're now staying here for another 3 nights before we depart back for Vietnam. So that's my status. It has been an interesting time. We're in this funky little apartment in a sort of a trendy, artistic sort of niche of Istanbul, and not too far from the older part of the city, just over the bridge and up the hill. Anywho's, what's going on for you guys? I've got a couple of questions to talk to, although I need to refresh this because I know another one came in because I just answered it on my phone. Yeah, it's been intense for me. This level of travelling is not easy. One of the questions that Jen Burns asked, that's me on live, so that's always good to see. Can you talk about Overwhelm? I wrote back to her. That's quite synchronistic. M. Rose also wrote, yes, thanks, Matt. Overwhelmed might be an understatement for me. Feel like that's always the way at the moment. I'm over it. Yeah, so let's just talk about what this thing called Overwhelm is. So I wrote back as quite synchronistic because I had an interesting experience yesterday when we walked through town in the afternoon for a fair way, like 40 minutes, through the crowds of Istanbul to the Sistine Basilica, or the Basilica Sistine. I'm not sure which way you're supposed to say it, but it's basically this massive underground cistern, which is a water storage system. It's got something like 330 odd columns in there, big sort of granite or marble columns holding this thing up, and a huge amount of sort of vaulted ceilings because the city's built above it, right? And this thing has been here since 6 AD, 6th century AD, so at least 1500 years. Hi, Sister Tanya. And it's amazing, and you go in there, but it's let's just say it's crowded and there's a lot of energy. And I was feeling reasonably overwhelmed and over it. It was hot. I'm still limping a little bit because I've bruised my Achilles tendon on my left leg when a rock fell into a canyon that I was walking in and bounced off another rock and smacked me right in the back of the heel. Very lucky that it didn't hit me on the full somewhere more vulnerable. I was, at the time, because I heard it coming down, I did have my rucksack pulled up over my head and sort of crouched down ready to get smacked. Fortunately, that didn't happen because the rock it was rather large, or large enough that it probably would have seriously hurt me. But anyway, that's life. Things happen, and we have near misses reasonably regularly. I've also driven across Turkey, where the speed limits on the motorways are 140 kilometres an hour, not miles an hour, 140 kilometres an hour, and you have some cars, it's 3 lanes. You have some cars doing upwards towards 200, I would estimate, and you have trucks doing somewhere between 70 and 90 and everything in between. So that is quite an experience as well. We drove 400 kilometers in that sort of situation the day before yesterday, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking. I was certainly very focused. Of course, I'm driving on the opposite side of the road that I normally drive on at home as well, just to add a little bit of extra to the mix. Although I'm reasonably confident with that now after doing it for a few weeks on the local roads around the south coast, it was absolutely fine, but the motorway was next level. So anyway, I'm rambling and just giving you some background information. Yeah, Em said, ouch, interesting place to hurt. Yeah, left Achilles. So your Achilles heel and left side emotional. So it is interesting. And what is also interesting, it was probably a goat that knocked it down. This was a very steep canyon. I don't know if you saw some of the photos that were posted, probably on my private page. Maybe I can pop some in here as well. It is an amazing place. It's one of the longest canyons in the world. It's like 18 kilometers long, not that we traversed 18 kilometers of it. And through parts of it we were swimming. And it had rained the day before, so it was really slippery with this slick mud, and the water was completely silted up, so you couldn't see where you were walking, and so you're stumbling into rocks and stuff as well. I was having to climb up little waterfalls and rock obstacles, etc. So it was quite the adventure for Marie as well, but we ended up hiring a guide to help Marie get up some of these because they know the way, and they actually boost people up to get them up. It was quite humorous, and we were the first person to go up that day too. We got there super early and beat all the crowds, and on our way back the place was absolutely packed, so we were very lucky to enjoy it in that situation, even though I had an interesting altercation with a rock. Anyways, what I'm trying to get to, she also survived. It's good that Tanya's daughter survived. Yeah. In general, the motorways here in Turkey are fantastic, and down south the roads were very, very quiet, very empty, and the roads are really good. So you can be driving, the speed limit down there is 110, and it's quite comfortable to be driving along because there's very little traffic, and the roads are quite good. So in general, I've got a lot of admiration for the Turkish road system, but coming into getting closer to Istanbul is a little bit more hectic, especially if you're not used to it. But anywho's, I'm diverging. We want to talk about overwhelm. Overwhelm is any state of being really where you are experiencing more than you are used to, and you feel that your nervous system has been triggered into stress. You've become stressed to a point that it feels consuming or concerning, and you now feel that this is overwhelming you, overtaking you, significantly impacting you. The state of being that feels not always uncomfortable, because you can use the word overwhelmed to say I'm feeling an overwhelming sense of peace or an overwhelming sense of joy. It is anything that is beyond what you are normally habituated to experiencing, and we state that this is overwhelm, right? We are experiencing more than we are familiar with, or you could say comfortable with, but most of us are comfortable to experience more joy or pleasure or peace, although it still can be overwhelming. E.g., you can't function like you normally would. You lose the capacity to feel normal, to think normally. The experience of overwhelming joy overtakes you to a point where you basically put on rose-colored glasses and everything is amazing, and you might not be so aware of potential dangers or threats in the environment because you are overwhelmed with joy. Or another thing, when you meet someone who you fall in love with, you can become overwhelmed in love, and you don't necessarily notice certain things that could be an issue if you had a different perspective to the situation. But because love has overwhelmed you, you're seeing everything in that context, that perspective. Normally we use this term overwhelm in a negative connotation, and it's usually to do with stress. Overwhelmed, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, basically means there's more stress, more potential threat, more discomfort than you are able to deal with in a manner that you feel on top, that you feel in control. You are now feeling out of control, or out of the ability to control the amount of stress that you are experiencing, or the amount of discomfort, or the amount of potential threat, fear, that you are experiencing. In this rapidly changing world, it is, I think, quite common to feel overwhelmed from time to time. With all of the fear porn that is being projected through mass media, broadcast platforms and organisations, and the way that the majority of the population is responding to that information, it is easy for those of us who are energetically sensitive to feel overwhelmed with what we are sensing in the world around us, right? We are sensing a higher than normal amount of anxiety in the world. This is what I was experiencing yesterday in the crowds. Higher than normal level of anxiety coming, right? Everyone's fear when you're pushing through crowds is hard to take. However, everything is an opportunity, and this is what, this is where practice comes in. This is where you have to eat your own dog food, Matthew, right? You have to, practice what you preach. And for me, that's coming back to the breath. So I was doing a lot of deep breathing, potentially with sound, sighing on the way out to help my body relax, and to come into remembrance that this is an opportunity. And what is it an opportunity to do? To be a stronger beacon in this environment, right? To be the beacon, not the sponge. To be the beacon, not the sponge. To draw on my solar plexus, my energy, my innate light, and to radiate that out around me. One, to positively influence the environment and all of those who are around me, but two, to buffer me from all of their energy, which is basically a regurgitation of their education, right? Their state of mind based on what they are perceiving the world to be, which is threatening. And of course, when you're in crowds and you're all trying to get somewhere, it's like a competition, and people are jostling to maintain their space, and they're jostling to get there first, they're jostling to meet their needs, right? There's this sense of rat race when you're in a crowd, that there's a lack of everything. There's a lack of space, there's a lack of oxygen, there's a lack of opportunity. Someone's going to take it first. And so it's very easy to get drawn into this sort of fight mentality, this competitive mentality where you have to fight for your right, for your space, for your air, for your existence. Those of us who are energetically sensitive might feel that we're fighting for our very perception of ourselves. We're losing ourselves, right? We're becoming overwhelmed by the crowd's energy, and we're losing our sense of self. And so it's an opportunity. All states of overwhelm are an opportunity to stretch ourselves into finding more of a degree of comfort in the experience, right? To normalize what you are experiencing, to not make it too much, to stretch yourself to be able to cope with that so that it's not too much. It might be a lot, but it's not too much. And that doesn't mean that to normalize it means that it's something that we want to experience all of the time either, right? I know a lot of people worry that if they accept something, then they're going to get it more often, and that's not necessarily the case. We use in energy healing, we use this term, what you resist will persist. So when you fight against something, you actually are creating threads of attachment to the state that you are resisting. What you are fighting, what you don't want, actually keeps showing up more often because you are focused on it. You're focused on pushing it away. When you can accept it, you find a degree of neutrality towards it, which can allow yourself to be free of the situation, because you've now come into a peaceful relationship with it, right? You're no longer resisting it, you're no longer fighting it, you're no longer so interested in it because you've accepted it. From time to time, I come into this, into experiences that are a lot, right? They don't have to be too much, and they don't have to be overwhelming. They might be overwhelming at first, but we can stretch ourselves or adjust our attitude to be more accepting of it. And it can be hard. I have to admit, yesterday, in the heat and the crowds and walking up the hills and all of the energy going on, I was having heart palpitations, and it doesn't feel good, right? It feels really threatening when you don't feel that you have your normal capacity, when you don't feel that you are in control, when you don't feel that you are strong and on top and capable. When you start feeling fragile and frail, of course that can instigate more of a stress response, which then, unironically, makes you even more fragile and frail, more incapable, right? As we go deeper into the stress response, we become more capable of doing anything other than perceiving threats around us, and getting tighter and smaller and less capable of doing anything, and we want to curl up in a ball and reset. And sometimes that's okay as well. There's nothing wrong with that, although it can be a little bit, what's the right word, inconvenient when you're out in a foreign city, in a place that doesn't speak your language very much, and anyways. So hopefully I'm helping, Jen, talking about, can you talk about overwhelm? So I think I'm talking about overwhelm. So what to do about it? First and foremost, practice. And not just practice when you're overwhelmed, practice when you're not overwhelmed in reducing your stress, right? We have to practice deep breathing. We have to practice mentally managing our perspective. Always, right? And then the more that you practice when you're doing your meditations, when you're taking time out, having a relaxation, doing a walk in nature, swimming laps in the pool, doing whatever you do, going to the gym, whenever you have this opportunity to practice maintaining a perspective that everything's okay, even if it's a lot, that everything is an opportunity, and you don't need to feel so threatened by what feels like more than normal. Practicing breathing and relaxing your body and recentering and grounding, earthing yourself in, and connecting with your spirit guides, connecting with your own core, your solar plexus, radiating your light. Another practice that's very, very useful for then helping you when you feel that you're in a overwhelmingly stressful situation, is to come back. Go into your core, go into your heart, radiate your light, breathe deeply, soften yourself, soften your shoulders, soften your neck, soften your jaw. All of those things send cues, right? Getting your diaphragm moving stimulates the vagus nerve that sends cues back to your nervous system that it's okay, and that potentially the perceived threat that you're going into a stress response around is not as dangerous as you are making out, right? The level of stress might feel like a lot, and so your amygdala presses the big red panic button that you think there's a tiger in the room or something that's coming to eat you or squash you or imprison you, whatever, hurt you, and potentially that's not the case. Potentially you're just feeling everyone else's energy. Potentially you're just in a situation that is unfamiliar, and you're feeling overwhelmed in that, and so you've gone into a panic state when panic's not really helping you. And so the more that you can self-regulate your nervous system, which takes practice, right? You can't it's not just about listening to me and then thinking, oh yeah, I know what to do now. You have to fucking practice it. You have to practice it. You have to practice it. And even when you get yourself in a situation that's more than normal, you have to practice it even more diligently. But to have the capacity to practice it, you have to ingrain the practices by practicing, right? A concert pianist doesn't just practice when they're in a concert, right? They practice every day playing the pieces and stretching themselves, right? Going deeper into them, trying new, I don't know what they do with their fingers to be able to play the piano that well, but they have to practice to not just expand their capacity, but even to maintain their capacity to play the pieces that they play, right? They can't just not play for years on end and expect to sit down at the piano and be able to play just as well as they did before, because it requires maintenance, it requires practice. It's the same. You can't just get your body strong and then stop going to the gym and then 3 years later expect to be able to be just as strong. You won't be. Your body will regress because you are not using that capacity. If you don't use the capacity to regulate your nervous system, you lose the ability to regulate your nervous system. So you have to practice it. This is life. It's about practice. It's about doing the work, you know. People say, oh, I don't want to do work, but we have to do the work, and it's not always what our little ego wants to spend time doing, but it's valuable if we do. It's useful if we do. M said, it helps me to see that my intention is to release a heap of consciously suppressed, okay, I don't think it's the word sun, but it doesn't matter, a heap of consciously suppressed feelings, and I am doing just that and feeling new level of what I hold. It's okay. It's a process. Exactly, M. And yeah, I can add that in too. So for me, that is a very useful mentality to maintain. That for me, my intention is to become a more, I'll use the word powerful, a more powerful influence in the world that I live, right? A more powerful influence of good, right? My version of good, at least, which might not be your version of good, but that's okay. So it's not that I'm an egomaniac trying to take over the world, but I desire to spread my light on the planet, not as a way of controlling or suppressing other people's light, but in a way that is inspirational for those around me who at least resonate the same as I do. Right? I'm not deluded in thinking that I'm here to save the world for everyone, but I'm certainly here to live my life expansively and expressively through my own heart, right? And so when I find myself in situations that are challenging, it is always helpful to remember that this must be useful in me reaching my aspirations, right? My goals, my desired intention. Rather than thinking that this is some sort of punishment, or this is some sort of test, or this is some sort of mistake, or this is some sort of failing. I'm failing right now. What have I done wrong? You know, why is this happening to me? I always choose to believe the why is this happening to me because it is serving me to have this experience. And when you can come back to it is serving me to have this experience, that releases more stress, right? Because as soon as you make something wrong, right, something's happening that shouldn't be happening, this shouldn't be happening, right? As soon as you have that mentality to a situation, of course you're going to go into stress about it, right? Because if something shouldn't be happening, then that of course is threatening to the mind, to the amygdala, to the nervous system. So it's not helpful to have that mentality that this shouldn't be happening, or this is a mistake, or this is a failure of some description, or I'm being persecuted. This is someone else's fault. If you're making it your fault or someone else's fault, as soon as you're blaming anything, either yourself or something external for the situation you're having, you're basically saying that the situation isn't helpful. And I get it. When you're in a situation that feels uncomfortable and even threatening, it's hard to believe that it is a good, helpful, useful, beneficial experience. But quite often it is a beneficial experience, even though it's testing you. And it's not testing you to see if you pass or fail. It's giving you the opportunity to stretch yourself into more capacity. Right, I've almost done my half hour and I haven't answered Sister Julie's Ray's question. which I actually responded to, and I thought if she was online she might have answered back, but obviously not. So I will talk to it now. Hopefully that's helped with Overwhelm. Exactly. Em said it's also something we can't do anything about. I have to remind myself constantly. Yep. We can do something about it, but that is generally around changing our perspective to it, as opposed to controlling the external world, or even controlling what's going on internally for us, right? If you've got a pain in your ankle, then there are things you can do to help, but you can't just make the pain go away. But you can change your perspective to the pain, which then changes your relationship with the pain, which then changes how much the pain is influencing you, right? And therefore it doesn't feel as painful, even though the sensation, basically nothing's changed. It's just your relationship to the experience has changed your perception or your experience of the experience. And ultimately, your experience of the experience or your experience of the situation is all that really matters. That's the life you're living. And so we get to change the world based on changing our perspective to it, not necessarily changing what other people are doing or what other things are happening or changing the government or changing the situation. We're changing our relationship to the situation, which then changes our experience of the situation, which is good, right? This is how we exert our influence and our power on the world. And as our relationship changes, the energetic signature that we're sending out is actually an invitation for other people to do something similar. And then more and more people start changing their relationship to something, then the actual thing starts to change, because there's not so many people holding it in place by resisting it, by hating on it, by fighting it. All right. Anyway, Julie said, how to stop growing distrust and disdain for dismissive ass humans? And I wrote back a little bit tongue in cheek, why do you want to trust and like dismissive ass humans? I get it. Many of us, people pleasing, quote unquote, spiritual people, think that we should trust and like everyone around us. Or at least we shouldn't. Oh, great. That was my son just letting me know, just sent me a text, say, hey Dad, I'm out. He's been in the bush for 8 or 9 days now, in the high country of the Tauraruas, and it's the middle of winter there. So I looked on the weather the other day when he was saying where he's going, and it was -10 wind chill and 70 kilometre an hour wet nor'westers, and I sent him a text saying, mate, be careful. And he's on his own, of course. Anyway, he's just let me know that he's out, so that's great. So there's something else that I don't need to, quote unquote, worry about. Not that I try not to worry about things like that. But anyway, exactly. And when you make it wrong, you are entrapped with it. You're in a trap with it. Anyway, to talk to what Julie said, I know it's common for us to think that we should be nice people and we should be able to trust. There's this strange belief that if we're good, right, proper people, then the universe should be showing up in a way where everything around us should be, quote unquote, helpful in a way that's comfortable. E.g., we should be able to trust people that we're interacting with. And if we're a good person, then good things should happen to us, right? We have this belief. A lot of people have this belief that if you're a good person, good things happen to you. And therefore, if a bad thing happens to you, you take it as a personal attack, that you've obviously not a good person anymore because something bad's happened to you. Someone's been dismissive, or someone's been persecutory, or someone's been abusive, right? And so somehow people tend to believe, for some crazy reason, that this is a punishment and that they're obviously a bad person for attracting this situation. It's not the case. Most people in the world, by far, 99.99% of people in the world, you should not trust implicitly. You should not trust them because they don't have your highest good as their fundamental driving motivation. Why would they? Because you probably don't have their best good as your fundamental driving motivation either. You might be very careful not to hurt people. People like you and I are very careful not to hurt people or upset people, but still I recognize that I upset a lot of people. Even though it's not my intention to, just my very being seems controversial to them, and they tend to get a little bit antsy or upset that I seem oblivious to their situation or their pain or their point of view or whatever they want to think about it, right? Just because I'm not choosing to buy into what they are finding stressful. A lot of people find that annoying, let's say. But it's not my intention to annoy them. It's my intention to inspire them, but they're not getting that yet. So what do? Do I appease them by getting stressed with them and therefore diminishing my energy? No. Why would I do that? That's not useful. It's not useful for me. It's not useful for them. It's basically cementing in their experience, which is not a useful one for them to maintain any longer than they need to. So I trigger them by being myself. So the point is, Julie Ray, people who don't resonate with you don't deserve your trust, and you don't need to like them. Also, you don't need to not like them either. You don't need to hate them, and you don't need to fight them, and you don't need to prove them wrong, and you don't need to interact with them more than you have to, right? I know we all have to go to the shops and buy things from the cashier, and we all need to go to work and interact with our colleagues. We all need to do all sorts of things, get into taxis and deal with the taxi driver. We have to, if we want to live this world, then it doesn't pay to isolate us from everyone who we don't completely align with, because that would mean pretty much total isolation. And that's not really what we're here to do. We're here to have experiences. We're here to have relationships with people to help us gain a wisdom, right, through experiences of bouncing into other people. The point is, I think the main point is not to feel wrong about not liking other people or not being able to trust them. I think it's wise to not trust people. It's not useful to be overtly untrusting as well, in a way that you're now trying to control them to do what you want them to do, because you don't trust that they're going to do what they said they're going to do. So now you're looking into making sure that they do it. If they're not going to do what you want them to do, accept that, right? The point is to trust yourself, and to trust life is giving you opportunities to grow, opportunities to expand, opportunities to express yourself. That's all you really need to trust. Trust that you have the capacity to deal with whatever is showing up in your world. And then walk into the world with this more mature attitude that you're not reliant on other people doing what they say they're going to do. That you will always find a way to succeed, and to be happy, really. Not to think that other people doing what they say they're going to do is important for you to be happy. I know sometimes we need other people to help us achieve certain goals that we perceive are important for us moving forward. We book a ticket with a travel agent. We like to believe that the travel agent has booked the ticket correctly, and in some ways we have to trust that they've done that, even though when we get the ticket it's prudent to check that the dates are what you wanted, the times are what you wanted, the destinations are what you wanted, right? It's booked for the right year, etc. Right? There's all sorts of things that potentially you should be willing to invest some time in checking. Not because you're necessarily mistrusting of the other person, but because you are intentional on having the outcome that you desire, and you are willing to invest time in not necessarily micromanaging everything, but certainly being willing to take responsibility for your experience, right? And if you aren't willing to take responsibility for your experience and want to leave it up to someone else to organise and then blame them if it's not what you wanted, then that's just not an empowered way of being in the world. Of course, this is a fine line, right? Where does it become micromanagerial and create a lot of stress, as you have to check everything because you don't trust anyone? And when do you trust your intuition And when do you trust your intention to know what needs checking and what doesn't need checking? You know, you asked your son to put the bin out. Now, do you check that they've done it? And to what degree do you check? Can you just ask them, hey, did you put the bin out, mate? Or do you have to go outside and see that the bin's gone out? And then if you can't see the bin, then you walk down to the road and make sure they've put it in the right place? Or can you trust where is the level? And of course, that's not an absolute thing, right? Sometimes you'll get the intuition that you need to try, you need to check more deeply. Sometimes you'll feel that it's okay, and then if it's not okay, you'll deal with the consequences. All right, the bin didn't go out. We need to now do something about that, right? Everything is recoverable from, to some degree, even death. So hopefully that helps, Julie Ray. I think the most important thing is not to make yourself wrong for mistrusting other people and even for not liking them. At the same time, choose not to let that consume you and choose not to get contracted around it, but relax. Relax and think, well, that's a dismissive ass human. How much do I need to be involved with them? And not to put them in a bucket forever either, right? Not to cast a judgment as to someone and then make them wrong forever. But just recognize that in this moment, for whatever reason, they're dismissive and they don't deserve your trust, and trusting them is not useful for you. And move on. Do what you need to do to move on, which sometimes is uncomfortable, right? Sometimes means taking another route. Sometimes this would have been the easy option for getting the result that you desire, to be able to trust this person to do what they sort of indicated that they might do for you, and now they're sort of not doing it, and that's fucking frustrating. But there you go. The world is frustrating. I don't think anything around that is going to change. Frustration is pretty much par for the course these days, because we're in a very chaotic time of change where things are changing for a lot of people. I know we're having this experience with our retreats, right? A lot of people are changing their plans. A lot of people say they're coming and then gets closer to it, and all of a sudden they can't come. This seems to be more normal now than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. But that's okay. We just have to adjust our expectations around that, and then be willing to trust that we'll be able to juggle things to make things work, because this is the state of the environment right now. It's chaotic and things are changing quickly, and so people's plans are changing, and people are, quote unquote, what you might say, flaking out. But that's just because they're under a lot of stress, and their environment is not stable. None of our environments are stable. And so it's hard to stay committed to things you said you were going to do in the past, right? Contracts and promises are becoming harder and harder to keep, and therefore not so valid anymore. And I think that's okay. The more that we can all trust that people are going to basically act in an intentionally integral way rather than good way, then we will be able to adjust, adapt and accommodate to situations as they unfold, rather than get contracted that they're not happening the way that you thought they were going to, the way that it was promised, the way that it's supposed to happen, right? That rigid thinking is not useful in today's environment, so we have to let go of that, and that means we have to let go of trusting people are going to do what they promised, because their situation changes, and therefore their ability to deliver on the promise is going to change. And some people just, promise things far too haphazardly with no real intention to honour the promise. That's true also. So that's a hard fact of life. People generally are untrustworthy, so don't put too much trust in them doing what they say they're going to do. Therefore you won't be as disappointed, and you won't feel as blindsided by people not doing what you wanted them to do or expected them to do or they said they're going to do. Anyway, my friends, as per usual, gone over time, but then again I didn't come on last week because we were travelling at the time and it didn't really work for me. So there you go. Much love. Hopefully this was useful. Very happy to bounce off any other questions you have. You can write them in on this thread on Facebook, or on if you're watching it on YouTube. Or you can reach out to me with an email, mantara@mantara.nz, or NZ as you say it in America. Or you can write in ahead of time next week. Hopefully I'll be in Vietnam this time next week, before our retreat starts there, and I will intend to live stream again. Might not be at this exact time of day, it might be earlier or later, depending on when I choose to do it. Changing time zones. Anyway, my friends, much love. Bye for now.